My three core concepts in making introductions are quality, quantity, and speed. My goal is to introduce you to as many people as I possibly can, and to do so as quickly as possible, and make sure that these are people who can actually help you.
Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights and no fluff.
Hey everyone, I'm here with Joshua Cutler, VP of Learning and Development in HR Talent and Systems, with over 20 years experience designing L&D strategies, leadership programs for startups, large enterprise, and high growth organizations. A former educator, he combines HR strategy with instructional design to link individual learning to business outcomes and improve engagement, retention, and training ROI. He's also the world-leading HR super connector, making hundreds of strategic introductions daily to help professionals grow their networks. Nice to have you on today, Josh. How you doing?
Thanks, John. It's great to be with you.
So we were talking a little bit about, and it's funny because I was telling you about the Netflix show I was watching recently. So if anyone hasn't seen The Beast in Me, it's a pretty good show with Claire Danes and this other guy. And in the show, they reference, surviving the New York education system, right? And I know that you were in the New York education system as a teacher with kids and so on. How has that shaped your L&D career now, getting into training adults in the corporate side? That's a big transition.
The first thing I'd say is that I'm not familiar with that show, but the fact that they mentioned that the New York City school system is something that you should be proud to survive is absolutely spot on. Because I can tell you from my own experience, I mean, the level of corruption and sleaze and depravity that I encountered there is unlike anything that's even remotely close to even the most toxic company that you could ever even think of.
Oh, wow. They should make a TV show then, like The Office, but for teachers in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the show myself, but if you're telling me that's what they said, then it's absolutely spot on.
Wow.
So really, in terms of how my prior experience as an educator influences my decision-making in L&D, it really comes from an understanding of what L&D actually is. It's an educational function within a business, and in order to achieve the best outcomes, it needs to be recognized and appreciated as such. So bringing my background from education, I'm really able to take a more novel approach, if you will, in that I can think simultaneously, both as an educator choosing the appropriate methodology to link the learning need to the business outcome, partnering that with my knowledge of and linking that to the overall talent strategy. So, and to me, that should be the bread and butter of any L&D program rather than the exception. And I think that a large part of why L&D often falls short in many ways is that the people that companies bring in to do it don't have that meat and potatoes educational background to draw upon, if you will. They see it purely as a function of the business without recognizing it as something that requires a sound educational strategy to be successful.
So maybe getting into that a little bit into the weeds, what do you consider a good structure behind, when you're creating a course, let's say, for people, like an onboarding program, what are your considerations in terms of structuring it that maybe someone that doesn't have your background wouldn't have thought of,
Right. So I wouldn't say necessarily in terms of an onboarding program, because sound educational principles are universal, no matter what audience or topic is being presented. So I don't generally think in terms of only creating a single episodic course, but I think more in terms holistically of the big picture, because learning should be ongoing and continuous. There should never be any time in anyone's professional journey where there isn't something that the company is offering them to advance their career. And too often that is the case, which we can get into later. So really, if I can take a step back in terms of how this process actually develops. So as I was planning to leave teaching anyway, a number of my corporate colleagues were approaching me and they were saying, our L&D initiatives aren't achieving their ROI. We're not seeing gains in employee engagement. Come on, Josh, help us out here. So I said, okay, well, let's take a step back and put a definition on it. In order for someone to be engaged, what actually has to take place? And what I realized is that in order for an employee to be engaged, they need to understand how their personal career objectives fit in with the company's strategic vision. And it's that lack of that connection that causes the disengagement. So I said, okay, I'm going to create a new company. And I called it Teach the Trainer. And my business model was to use the strategies that educators have been using effectively for years because they know how well it works, and applying it in a corporate setting. And as simplistic as that sounds, to my great astonishment, nobody's ever tried that before. And through a number of the initiatives that I was involved in, I became known as the guy who saved failing L&D programs. It's not something I set out to be. I certainly never marketed myself that way, but I became known as the guy that people bring in when all their more traditional HR related approaches have failed. And I would say my biggest successes involved several initiatives where, instead of bringing in HR people as most companies normally would, during the summer break, I gathered up a group of some of the best teachers that I knew, and we partnered with clients whose L&D initiatives had been stagnating for years. Even before the summer break was over, we had the whole thing cleaned up and reformatted and ready to go. And it really speaks to just how wide the knowledge gap is between HR and actual trained educators, because not only are the expectations so much higher in education, but the accepted standards are so far above and beyond anything that exists in any company. And I can show you the rubric that I was evaluated by, just so you can get a feel for it. And if you'd like, I can speak further about that at some point later on. But really, that's the key to it. I mean, I've been saying this for quite some time. If you really want to fix L&D and get it right, hire teachers, not career HR people.
That makes sense. I mean, I think, in HR's defense too, a lot of stuff in the business just gets thrown on HR. You want to fix culture, throw it to HR. You want to fix learning and development, throw it to HR. Comp and Ben, throw it to HR. Like, just pile it on, right? Operations, I find, well, if we don't have someone, we'll throw it to HR too. So it gets to be a point where they can't be a master of everything, right? Usually they have one or two really strong skill sets, and you can be a generalist too, but you're gonna fail when it becomes difficult with certain things. So it's difficult because for some companies, they don't want to invest in L&D. We've seen that, where they're going to use off the shelf modules, or you can buy LMS systems. That was the big thing I remember seeing with corporate. It was, let's find an LMS system. They got all the courses already done, and you just log in and do the videos they got, right? Like, what do you say to companies that are doing things like that are just, trying to find the box option? Here's the box that'll teach you the basics, right?
Well,
customer service 101.
First of all, saying something like that to any trained educator would spark the same gasp that I just had. Yeah. So first of all, you don't actually know what needs your employees have unless you actually assess them, not just at the beginning, but continuously throughout the time that they're with your company. And far too often I see, and in fact, I was just a few weeks ago, I was on a call with Josh Burson himself, and he was speaking about some AI strategy where you apparently tell the AI bot or whatever it's called what you need to work on, and then it comes up with a formula for you. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, you don't design a learning program just by telling somebody what you need, and they're supposed to just take it as a given that's accurate. You need to actually assess people and figure out where they are and how much knowledge they actually have about the topics that they're going to be taught. And there's no off the shelf solution that can do that. Moreover, the specific content that needs to be taught will obviously vary drastically from one company to the next. So if there is no one size fits all way to do that accurately. So you're really just throwing your money in the garbage if you take that approach. And that's one of the things that I incorporate into all of the initiatives that I'm involved in, which in education is called differentiated instruction. So within any topic that needs to be taught, there are some people who know a great deal about it. There's some people who don't know that much about it. And there's some people whose knowledge base is somewhere in between. But you need to know exactly who knows how much about whatever it is that you're teaching them. Otherwise, you risk teaching them at a level where they're not at. It's either too advanced or too simplistic for them, and they're not going to gain anything from that experience, and the ROI is going to be non-existent. And that just shows again how different the standard is, because in the education sector, differentiating your instruction to meet the needs of all of your students is required. It's not something that you can choose not to do unless you want to get skewered on your evaluation.
Yeah.
So,
it makes sense.
There you go as an example.
And I guess that's the thing, is the ROI is a key thing. Is, are they even tracking ROI in terms of like outcomes and so on, right? And to sort of pivot on that point, in in recruiting and retention, that's where we see, you know, having you can see that measurably in terms of reducing your attrition. Part of that is really good onboarding, ongoing learning and development, giving people a sense of belonging by giving them opportunities, right? And you can do that through developing people. I know GE, for example, is well known as a really good training ground for executives. Like we hear it all the time, like how they've come in there, they mentor them, they train them through the university and whatnot they have there and whatnot. So it's a whole program pipeline of good executive talent. Not every company can afford to do that, but there's definitely some things smaller companies can do to reduce attrition, right?
Sure.
And so what would you recommend for them in terms of like setting this all up?
So fun fact, getting back to what you said, GE was actually the first company to have a chief learning officer at all.
There you go.
But really, you wouldn't necessarily take a different strategy for a smaller company because people are still human beings and they all need to follow the appropriate educational pathways to get from point A to point B. So it really doesn't change based on the size of the company. It really only changes based on the size of the initiative, which of course can be scaled to be as large or as small as you want, because the strategy itself doesn't is the backbone of whatever it is that you're doing. So really, having the strong learning strategy in place trumps everything else, because once that's there, it really doesn't matter what platform you use. And one thing that I often see, really in any L&D interview, the quickest way that I know that whoever's interviewing me doesn't know anything about L&D is when they start asking about all the different platforms and programs that I use, first and foremost, before actually addressing how to build the learning strategy. Because without a sound learning strategy, it doesn't make any difference because it's not going to work. The way I describe it, it's like installing the doors and the windows before you've built the foundation of the house. That's really a good way to look at it.
Is that the biggest problem you're seeing with companies that you're going to, is that they don't have a good foundation, and so everything else is just mishmash kind of job?
Yeah, I mean, there is no, in most cases, there is no actual functional cohesive unit where everything works together as a well-oiled machine. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but there's no actual strategy in place. And really, to put together a good learning strategy is just a matter of following sound educational principles. And before you even differentiate your instruction, you need to figure out the topics that need to be taught, divide them up into specific lessons, which are scaffolded, meaning that the content of the next lesson builds on the content of the previous lesson. And then you build that out into a thematic unit of lessons all around the same topic. And then once you finish that, you move on to the next series of lessons. That's how teaching works in school. That's how effective L&D would work in a company, just the same.
Yeah, it seems logical, but I guess if they don't have that background of the foundational background of knowing how to do that, then it becomes kind of piecemeal. Like, oh, we're seeing our reps can't close deals, let's do a training on closing deals or whatever. They just think about that one issue to fit. They're trying to patchwork issues, right, in the company, and maybe that's not the right approach at all, right? So
no, it certainly isn't. And to that point, I've always believed that L&D should be proactive rather than reactive. I mean, because what I don't want to see is somebody coming to me after the problem has already surfaced and said, "Oh, we've had this issue for 6 months. Why is we need an L&D initiative to address it?" Well, why didn't you come to me sooner? So one thing that I do, especially with the larger, more enterprise type clients that I've worked with, is that I'll assign somebody on my team to serve as a liaison to each of the different verticals across the company. So that way there's always a continuous flow of information and nothing ever gets lost in translation, so we can get real-time updates on exactly what the situation is and exactly what needs to be taught and trained upon at any given time. So that way what you just said doesn't happen.
Yeah, I know, it makes sense. And if you're doing proper onboarding too, you may not have those gaps because you did a full training with everybody. So, but I guess there's part of like ongoing learning and development. Then there's also there is going to be certain pain points that you have in your company, right? So how do you address both? Like, one is setting up a good plan, but then what about for addressing issues like that though, which will come up regardless, right? I mean, you can't, no organization's perfect.
Sure. I mean, so for the purpose of onboarding, I mean, that's basically that's what they used to call pre-hire orientation. That's just a very basic example of what's expected of you at the company. So that really shouldn't require anything tremendously difficult. Now,
Yeah.
of course, we always have to account for things that may come up unexpectedly, and you could always, if needed, come up with a one-off type of scenario there. But for the most part, most of the challenges that companies face across the board are generally pretty similar. I mean, companies generally, regardless of whatever size or scale or industry they're in, share about 90% of their core business concepts, because every company has a product or service that they sell to a specific consumer of some kind. So with that as the framework, it's not really going to be all that different, depending on what your needs are.
Yeah. And so where do you see the trends now in the L&D industry? I mean, we're having AI come in now,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of this being able to customize with AI, using AI avatars with this, like you can have an AI avatar read a script and do the training for you without having to hire an instructor even now, right? So what do you see with all this technology coming into the space? Is it just,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
the fact that you just said that, I
efficiencies?
actually
And
felt my heart jump out of my chest when you said that, because to an actual educator,
I mean,
and
you're going to have that come up though, right? They're
yeah,
going to say,
I
well,
know.
we, instead of
So,
paying the instructor, we'll just get the AI avatar to do it. I mean, you can write the
so
script.
here's what I say when people suggest that to me as an option, especially
Yeah.
if they have kids. You have kids?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I have three of my own.
But if you came to me, I'd say, hey, how about if your kid's school, instead of a teacher, had your kids sit in front of an AI avatar that would teach them according to whatever they deemed necessary, and then they would, your kids would either get it or they would. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, they're kids, so it's maybe a little
It doesn't
different, but
matter.
I mean,
Anything, it's even more important,
yeah,
because they need that foundational knowledge. So that's really a matter of being penny wise and pound foolish. It may save you
yeah,
money on the front end, but it's going to cost you a whole hell of a lot more on the back end, because you need an actual human being making human decisions based on actual critical thinking, which AI can't do. Because
yeah,
what is AI ultimately? All it is a very quick pattern recognition system. So if you ask
yeah,
AI a question on Google, what does it do? All it does is it just very quickly gathers 100 different articles to come up with some pattern that most likely represents the answer that you're looking for. But it's not actually thinking thoughts. It's just
yeah,
gathering collections of patterns and sequences. That's all it is. It's not replacing the learning strategy. So I could say this: AI can be helpful as long as it's used judiciously as a supplement, but not a replacement for a sound learning strategy.
oh, fair enough. And where do you see L&D going in the next 5 years based on all this stuff that's changing and whatnot?
I mean, honestly, it's always more of the same. And in the education space, we always used to say the teaching is the only industry that's always 10 years behind itself, because they come out with these new initiatives and come out with new terminology for the same thing. And it's really just the same nonsense recycled in a different way. And honestly, most aspects of business are pretty much the same if you think about it.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I don't know that anything really that drastically different will come about, because, I mean, look at the major innovations in HR. We take the same concepts and give them different names. Compensation and benefits is now called total rewards, but it's doing the same work. You know,
yeah.
HR itself used to be called personnel, but how much has it really changed from those
Well,
days?
now it's people. Now it's the people
Now it's
function,
people.
right?
That's right.
So
Right.
full circle. Yeah,
Right.
no, I get that. And so I guess the way humans learn hasn't really changed
No.
much. We're, like our brain works a certain way,
Yeah.
and the way we interact with people and connect. I
Yeah.
totally get the need for having someone there that can answer questions. And also I find, as someone that's I've been a corporate trainer before myself, and I've also taught at the university and college, and being able to adapt to the audience, their engagement level. If you see them starting to doze off, and you can kind of change subjects, or you can adjust what you're saying to get them engaged. Because I find being an educator is also partly being an entertainer to a certain extent. You have
Yes.
to entertain to engage, to get people to absorb the messaging, right? If you're just dry and monotone, people,
Well,
it's like
obviously, I mean,
there's
that's
no
true for
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 everything,
any
right?
message you're trying to send, whether it's in an
Yeah,
educational capacity or not. People have to be genuinely interested in what you're saying, and how you present that information makes all the difference. So even though it may be factually accurate, if it's not resonating with people in the way that they need to hear it, they're not going to tune it out. even if the information itself is valuable and useful for them.
I mean, I also find like storytelling as a way of educating is also helpful, right? So being able to use your personal experience and your
Sure.
stories to convey messaging, right? I find that can be pretty interesting. And an AI won't have stories; they'll be just reading the script. So I get the
Right.
difference.
And you can't, there's no way to actually engage people by reading from a script, because how can you actually speak and have a dialogue and think of higher order thinking questions to ask somebody when, because one thing that you learn about teaching is that somebody might ask a question that takes the conversation in a totally different direction that you weren't expecting. So how can a robot adapt in that way and think on the fly in terms of how to create a new series of questions based on what was just asked, and how to guide the conversation around the original topic based on the new unexpected question? It can't. That requires
There's a lot of
human
nuance here for sure.
Right. Of course there is. You can't replace something that requires abstract thought with a computer program. It's
Yeah.
the argument in favor of saving money doesn't justify the cataclysmic failure that you'll receive in terms of your ROI, or more accurately, lack thereof.
Yeah. Can you speak to a little bit about what kind of ROI do you typically see when you bring in an L&D system? Because they say, oh, hiring an L&D executive, it's expensive, right? Any executive you bring on is going to cost you. So what do you say to that? Like, what kind of ROI do you typically see in organizations that bring, like, really truly embrace L&D as a function,
Well, that they actually recognize that the ROI has to be measured in the actual learning outcomes and or otherwise referred to as behavioral changes. And what I see is that a lot of companies only tally up course completion rates, or
Yeah.
they give you a survey and you say how you felt about the course personally. Well,
Yeah.
first of all, a course completion rate doesn't really tell you much of anything, because you could go to class every day, fail every test, and get an F, but you still completed the course. So that doesn't really tell you much of anything at all. And really, what does a course completion rate tell you? It doesn't give you any tangible data. I mean, I don't really care how you felt about it personally, but my only concern is, was it beneficial in terms of helping you do your job better and take your career to the next level? So that requires not only continuous assessment through not only examinations through the L&D program, but also through the actual archival of work that people actually do. And I follow up with the line managers of people who are actually receiving the training, and I'll ask them, well, how much are you following up based on the initiative that we just did to make sure that those skills are being taught? So that, and then you can measure to what extent have those individuals improved in their performance regarding the content that was taught to them compared to how well they were performing it before. It has to be a hands-on process, and you can't take a lazy way out, which is really what most companies do. And L&D is often seen as an afterthought because it's so rare to actually see companies doing it the right way.
I think it's also like, in terms of like the after learning assessment or after learning checklists or completion rates, I find that it's very much like a cudgel for middle management. Like, are all your guys, did they all complete training by this Friday? We need everyone to be 90% completed. Like, it's very much becomes just a compliance thing rather than, oh, we actually want to see an outcome. We want to see that after this training, that X, Y, and Z happens in the business, and we can track to see that. For example, having a course on referrals, and then you see all of a sudden, oh, our referral rate for our salespeople went up by 10%. They're all asking for referrals now as a behavior, right? And you can track that. So, I mean, I get that in terms of having to follow up and also to make sure that all your managers are actually trying to institute this behavioral change that you're trying to create, which is, it has to be a top-down, like, well, you need leadership to be engaged with this as well, right? So
across the board. And you also need the people who are receiving the training to be engaged just as well, and to recognize why it's important for them. And that's also a key piece, as I'm glad you brought that up. as to why disengagement occurs. Because if you're thinking only in terms of what the company needs to implement that behavior change on the macro level, then the employees are going to say to themselves, well, that's great for the company, but what is this going to do for me personally in my own career development as I try to advance in my career? And so really it has to be addressed on the macro level as well. On the micro level as well. It's not only in terms of the core competencies that the company needs to move forward, but you actually need to assess and address the individual skills that each employee needs to move forward in their career, because that's what's going to drive the employee engagement and retention. Because remember, the most common reason that people leave their jobs isn't necessarily for a higher salary. It's because they feel like the opportunity to learn and grow and develop and move on to the next stage of their career simply isn't available to them in the position where they currently are. And this is a fixable problem. And you just need to get the right people in there to care enough to do it. That's really all it is. All of the problems that we talk about in L&D and employee engagement and retaining your best people, these are all things that can be solved with the right mindset and the right effort. You just have to care enough to do it.
No, it makes sense. And I mean, I totally get where a lot of companies are just either it's an afterthought. We'd love to do it, but it's, they don't want to put money into the HR program in general. So it's sort of the viewpoint of, as a burden rather than as a revenue center, which it can be, right? Like, I think it's really incumbent on a lot of HR executives to be able to talk that ROI and that business case for things.
Right.
And so that's important, right? And speaking of that, we were talking about how you've now become the global HR super connector, right? And we were talking about how you're doing networking at scale and so on. But I think for any leader listening to the podcast right now, it's like networking as a tool, not only for your career, for everything else. Like, it's very useful. And maybe talk about your approach and how did you become the super connector? That's what I want to know.
So it really happened almost by accident. And I should clarify that becoming a super connector isn't something you can set out to do. It's something that basically just happens and you just have to go with it. And I actually wrote an article about networking in HR that tells a large piece of the story, which I can share with you and your viewers later if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
You can certainly post it next to the link to the video. So several years ago, I was connected. I happened to be introduced to several of the people who at the time were the top super connectors in the New York area. And they introduced me to a few people, and then that led to a few more. And then gradually that small number led to dozens and then hundreds and now multiple thousands all this time later. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I really have a knack for doing this. But I realized that since I'm going to be doing this at a far greater scale than anybody has ever conceived of, I have to create my own unique scalable process that really isn't in any way similar to anything that anybody has ever done before. Because what I do is, in terms of sheer volume, there's no way that I'd be able to get through it so quickly and still have time to do the work that I actually get paid for, unless I created a totally new system that's really, quite frankly, unprecedented. And really, my three core concepts in making introductions are quality, quantity, and speed. My goal is to introduce you to as many people as I possibly can, and to do so as quickly as possible, and make sure that these are people who can actually help you. And as I talk to more and more people, I see that a lot of their problems are very similar, and that it's often a repetition of other types of problems that other similarly situated people are facing. So since I see patterns in the types of problem people are having, in many cases, I know immediately which types of people to introduce them to, and it doesn't even require any thought at this point. Figuring out once I know what your goal is and what you're trying to accomplish, figuring out which people you need to meet, for me, is as second nature as brushing my teeth or tying my shoe. It's literally that simple. It doesn't even require any thought at all. I'm just ready to go. And in some cases, actually in a lot of cases, I can make that transition so seamlessly that I'll actually start making introductions for people while we're still on the call. I won't even need to wait and hang up. But really, I divide my connections into four broad categories. And, because people come to me all the time and they're like, oh, do you know somebody at this company or in this industry or whatever the case may be? And that my answer is always, I don't know, because that, one, people change companies and industries so quickly nowadays, and two, that's just more information than I could ever possibly keep track of. But what I do realize is that the needs that people have typically are typically quite similar among the different people that I speak to. So that's why I divide my connections into 4 broad categories within HR. So the first category is internal HR executives, which includes both full-time and fractional. The second is HR executive recruiters, that's you. And the third is third-party providers, which includes vendors and consultants and so forth. The fourth is other miscellaneous people who aren't in the HR space themselves, but whose work requires them to be well connected in the HR space. If you think about it, everybody in the HR space falls into one of those 4 categories.
Yep.
So based on whatever your individual need is, I know which category of people to introduce you to. Oh, you're looking for a new executive HR role. Okay, perfect. I can introduce you to my group of recruiters. You're looking to provide a third-party solution. I can introduce you to consultants who can put you in touch with more key decision makers more quickly than I can. I see the same patterns developing over and over and over again, which is why the conversation doesn't need to be very long. And that's how and as you saw yourself, I don't really have to say very much. Some people question, well, you have to take the time to get to know people and this and that. Well, no, I really don't. And that really is a luxury for people who don't make a lot of introductions. Because really, when you say get to know people during the context of a networking call, what does most of that actually consist of? You're just bullshitting back and forth, but you're not actually accomplishing anything tangible. So my position is, well, we could sit around, shooting the breeze or whatever, or I can actually start in making a better use of our time and introduce you to people right now who can actually help you. So that way they'll get back to you sooner and you can accomplish your goal faster. I mean, isn't that what you'd ultimately like? I mean, I would think. So, and there are some people who may not get it, which is fine. And I always say my networking style isn't for everyone because I do require reciprocation. I certainly never ask for money in exchange for my introductions, but I do require introductions in return. Because one, I have goals that I need to accomplish. I need to eat too. And two, the only way I can continue being the world's top super connector is if people continue introducing me to more and more people. It can't continue any other way. And so unfortunately, there are occasions where if many weeks or even months have gone by, I'll always follow up and say, I introduced you to all these people. Please do your part and do your part of the bargain and introduce me to people as well. And some people either refuse or ignore or ignore my request or whatever the case may be. And in that case, I won't hesitate to withdraw those connections, which means that whichever people I introduce them to, and by the way, I hate doing this. It's not something I ever want to do, but sometimes I don't have a choice. And by withdrawing those connections, it means that the people I introduced you to will never speak to you again, and neither will anybody in their extended network. And, it breaks my heart when it has to happen, but it only happens when somebody brought that outcome on themselves, because it's never what I want.
I think the spirit of reciprocity is
Right.
a big one. And that's part of networking, right? Is having that reciprocal kind of thing of trying to help each other any way you can, offering value whenever possible. I mean, I think those are solid things. And you got to play ball. I mean, that's kind of how it goes. I mean, and I like how the method of how you have your buckets of referrals, which you have to simplify it when you're doing volume. And I totally get that. I mean, for me, I have an ATS system that we use for every person that I talk to. I build a profile for them.
Right.
I put their resume or their information in there, notes all about them and their location, what they're looking for.
Right.
And that way it's searchable database, right? You have to have something to track all these people that you're talking to. So simplicity is important, I think, for sure.
Right. For me, it's all in my head. I don't need to gather that much data about each person. All I need to know is, okay, this is what your goal is. Boom. These are the people I can introduce you to. Done. And it'll be done literally within a matter of minutes because I can make the connection that quickly. You saw what I've done for you.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely attest to the fact of getting a lot of referrals, and actually, everyone you send me has been spot on. Definitely someone that we can work with. So,
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, and I guess the bucket strategy is working. So keep with what's working, and at the end of the day too, it's like you're doing this for several reasons. You want to obviously help people, but you also want to make connections yourself with people that potentially could help you land your next role and so on, right? So I totally get the strategy behind that. And I think every executive should be involved. You don't have to be a super connector, but you should be connecting in your industry, right? With peers, with leadership in other companies to be able to get your next role.
Right, especially at the executive level, because executive jobs aren't filled through applications. They're filled only one of three ways: either internally through a third party recruiter or a referral. So you
absolutely.
Networking. I mean, you should really be starting them from the very beginning of your career, and that's something I actually had to learn because having spent the first half of my career as a teacher. Civil servants don't really network the same way because the expectation is that you're going to be spending your whole career at the same job until you can collect a pension, which is obviously not the case in the corporate world, where people switch jobs every few years. But really, the saying is your network is your net worth. And the higher up you climb up the corporate ladder, the more true that becomes. And of course, as you get to more senior and executive levels, and I apologize for the noise, they're doing construction down the hall. You can edit that out, I hope.
Oh, we can't even hear it. It's cleared out. It's all good.
Okay, good. Well, forget I said it then. But as you get to more executive levels, all of your future income is tied to whatever network you have. It's literally as vital as that. And I would say, frankly, that the vast majority of the opportunities that I've had and the doors that have been opened for me have become so as a result of the connections that I've made and that I have, far more so than anything that I have actually accomplished professionally in any of the roles that I've had.
Well,
because if you think,
it's good to hear that in a way of that it's worked for you, but also, very humbling in the sense that like our success is not always being the best. It's also who who you can connect with, and if they want to work with you too, like if they like working with you, they like you as a person. I mean, I think a lot of executive hiring, it's rapport building as well. That's a big part of it because people want to work with people they like and feel that they could work with, and aligned with values as well, which is not on a resume. Your values are not on a resume from time to time. So I think
that's true. But there should be there should be a section on your resume for a set of adjectives that describe your personal values, and maybe companies should put that on there. But whatever the case may be, that's actually an interesting idea.
Well, values are something that people speak to and they have slogans for, and companies have values, but living them is not always as easy as writing them down.
Right. And to that point, there's some cases where companies live up to their values and others where they don't. And that's why I don't believe in creating a list of target companies. Because one, you could be missing out on potentially great opportunities that you wouldn't have thought of. And two, you don't really know if they live up to their values. All you can really do is make your best guess based on your perception of what it might be like to work there. But of course, you'll never know until you're actually in the seat.
Yeah. Well, and I can definitely attest to that with working with our clients, right? We work with a lot of companies that it takes time to learn the work environment, the culture, the way they operate. That's part of the the discovery process for us to sort of dig in. But regardless of all that, people can put on a very good show in the beginning until someone starts and works there, and then you see after a few months really how it is internally, right? So can definitely appreciate that.
It's funny you say that, because to me, even if that happened, based on what I saw and experienced in the New York City school system, there's no company that can even come close to that level of literally outright psychotic depravity. And to refer to it by any lesser term wouldn't be doing it justice. And I'm not saying that hyperbolically. I mean that sincerely. Yeah. So given what I've already experienced, anything else is going to be a literal cakewalk by comparison. So for me, because I was accustomed, well, let me take a step back.
Yeah.
Most people in most professional environments can't wrap their heads around the idea that any organization exists that takes pleasure in harming its own employees. But in the New York City school system, that absolutely is the case. And really, to survive there requires the same mentality as surviving in prison. The strong survive and the weak get destroyed, because the only way you'll be able to make it is by assuming that every person you meet is a potential traitor who's out to sabotage you until they can prove otherwise. And that's not paranoia. That's the actual reality of working in that system.
Yeah. No, and I guess, from being in those toxic workplaces, and I think we've all, like everyone who's had a career for more than 10, 15 years has probably been at an employer that was toxic. Maybe not as toxic as that, right? But I think just because we've tolerated that in the past doesn't mean also that we should continue to tolerate that or be like, oh, it wasn't as bad as this place. I think, everybody's got to kind of put their foot down with certain things of what's acceptable at work, right? And why do we have to just tolerate our workplaces? I think that's a big thing that maybe needs to refix a little bit.
Well, it's funny you say that, because companies have an incentive not to tolerate that because it can affect their bottom line.
Yeah.
In the New York City school system, where there's no accountability and they have a $40 billion annual budget and an endless supply of cash coming in, they have no incentive to care. So basically their attitude is, we'll violate your rights however we see fit. Oh, sorry. We broke the law. Here's a couple $100,000 for your trouble. Next. It makes nothing to them. They don't care.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty wild. But hopefully there'll be some improvements.
No, there won't be.
No. Well, you got a new mayor, so maybe things will change with your mayor. And I'm not going to get into the politics of that, but
a mayor who has never actually held any real job in his life is now running the most important city in the world as his first actual job. So wrap your head around that.
Well, maybe we need L&D to come in and help with developing some onboarding then.
I would never work for the city of New York ever again. If that's one thing that it wouldn't matter if they doubled or even tripled my salary. I would never work there ever again.
But we'll leave it at that note. I think that's pretty funny, tongue in cheek, but we'll see how it goes. And I really appreciate your time and digging into L&D.
Likewise, John, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
And